Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Hey, it's another year, another time to make some more money, and I've got the course for you. Start the Conversation, Get the Meeting will help your team, both business development, sales development, get into those new cold accounts, whether that function is under marketing or sales. I'll help you with that by starting organic, natural conversations, not pitching. Have people open up with you, build up a connection with them, understand your total addressable market, prioritize it, and put in a system that scales, that's predictable, that works the way you want it to work instead of the old school pitch. Believe me, I've sat through so many of these cold calling seminars, courses, books, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and it's evolved. And what I'm doing today is what's working in today's world. It works naturally, and people are just loving it, getting meetings, closing deals, and doing it without the rejection that is typically there in sales. So check it out at b2brevenue.com under the training tab. You can schedule a call with me. We can talk it over. I'll explain how it works and how we can work together on it. You can buy it per student, or I'll customize it for your particular product and team and coach you through that process. Also, if you're a sales leader and you want predictability, you want direction, momentum, and control with your deals, you can sign up for that course as well. Same type of model, a year-long access to it. It's content, community, and coaching, all included at b2brevenue.com. You can get my free ebook there on how companies make product selections. That's all free. Let's get into the interview, but I want to make sure you're checking out my partners. They're in the show notes. This week, it's Pipedrive and CoVideo. Pipedrive is the new CRM. It's been out for 5 years. I've been using it forever. I love that. It's connected up with your email, your calendar, and now they have team capabilities. CoVideo is the video email system. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's the way to break into new accounts. It's so much more engaging than text. Check them out. Also, make sure you're checking me out on LinkedIn, Brian G. Burns on LinkedIn. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end. Hey, Nadine, thanks for joining us today as we're getting started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Brian. It's great to hear your voice real time. I've been a fan for a very long time. Good morning, everybody who's listening. Thanks for inviting me. Little bit about myself. I live in San Francisco, although I'm originally French. I'm an immigrant. And I have a large practice here that focuses on executive coaching and organization development at a high level, usually VP, C-suite. And I've been in business for about 30 years. I was an entrepreneur before it was a thing.
And how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, the first 10 years, I was more of a clinical psychologist. So I focused on just patient care and 100% trauma. And so to this day, I do see patients from the district attorney's office. These are people, Brian, like you and me, but who've had something very bad happen to them. And so I do maintain that. But just over the years from running my own business and from having a little bit of an HR background as well, I was pulled into different companies to help, build the leadership team, help with confidential HR projects and that kind of thing. And it's funny because actually I went internal for 6 years. Bank of America was one of my largest clients, and they purchased my practice along with 15 of my consultants. So I was internal doing mergers and acquisitions. And then when I went back out on my own when the headquarters moved away from San Francisco, and I didn't want to move. So that's really how I came upon this. And I love executive coaching. I really love being a consultant. I am a lifelong learner, and I'm always learning about new industries. And the technology really has revolutionized my field as well. And so I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and then I also have another PhD in organization development.
That's a lot of studying, huh?
There's a lot of studying. You know what that means, Brian? It means I was broke for many years.
Oh, boy. You had to pay for that?
I paid for it all myself. I worked 7 jobs and But I'm clear out of debt now for a couple of decades, thank goodness. The other way I was broke is, and I'm appreciating that more and more now, is time. I had very little time. And, this is the new poverty, is especially here in San Francisco, the Bay Area, the growth is so huge right now. A lot of us are time poor.
That's true, isn't it? Do you run that into that issue in coaching a lot, I bet? I
do. And that goes hand in hand with stress.
Yeah.
Our cognitive abilities really go on a downward spiral. And, just from a neurophysiological point of view, we're not thinking with our frontal cortex at that point. We're tired, we're not sleeping enough. I've got many clients who just can't even make it through a meeting without, checking their phone or worrying about the next meeting, who just walked by. We've got this open environment now. It saves a lot of money on rent, but what it means is it's very hard to have a focused executive meeting, without somebody walking by or interrupting. So yes, I see that a lot.
Yeah, I think so, because the more I hear about these open office environments, the research is showing that they're really reduce productivity in a lot of ways. And
yes.
I think people just went on the bandwagon because they saw high-profile companies doing it. But I think they had bigger spaces and a lot of nooks and crannies where people could go and have a little bit of private time.
Yes. I did a lot of research on this for my new book on stress and leadership called Stress Less Leadership. And, there's a whole section dedicated to introverts and the kind of space that introverts need to be productive. And if you think about that, 1 out of 2 of us is an introvert. I mean, it's not just how we recharge our batteries, Brian, it's how we think. And so very, very counterproductive for them. But, thankfully, a lot of these companies now have a remote work policy.
Yeah.
And so that allows introverts to, work from home or in a coffee shop with their earphones in and that kind of thing. So, yes.
Now, how do you go about coaching an executive? What's the process you take them through?
Yes. Well, the first thing, and this has directly to do with both of your podcasts, actually, Brian, is to really identify what the benefits of coaching are and to separate it from other professions. So the first thing the client needs to know, the potential client needs to know, is that executive coaching is very different from a life coach, for example, and there's a plethora of them now, or a psychiatrist or a business consultant. So, for example, if you're having supply chain issues, a coach might be able to help you think through some of the options, but you really need a business consultant at that point. If you are having entrenched psychiatric issues, such as hearing things, seeing things, that is definitely a psychiatrist. And if you're having a life crisis like a divorce or adjusting to a new kid or to a new area, city, that's more like a life coach. So an executive coach helps boost leadership. And an executive coach is a qualified professional who works with executives for the sole purpose of helping the executive gain awareness, clarify their leadership development goals, achieve those leadership development objectives, and unlock their leadership potential. And usually that impacts not only them, but of course their teams and the business in a transformative way. So it's this very unique and special, one-of-a-kind relationship that is only geared to the executive. And a good executive coach, and this was my first book, was on preparing coaches and aspiring coaches. It's called The Art of Executive Coaching. I really make the point, if you're a consumer looking for an executive coach, the coach really needs to have 3 things. One, they need to have been an executive themselves. It's pointless trying to take advice from somebody who's never sat in your seat. The pressures of leadership are large. And 2, they need to understand human motivation, human psychology. While they're not a psychiatrist, leadership development is personal development. And then the third thing is to have a clear methodology. Like none of this coaching in the moment, that kind of thing. There's a clear methodology that good coaches follow.
And what is that?
Yeah, so what is that?
Is it easy or is it hard or is it intuitive?
Tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. Coaching is not for the faint of heart. Yeah, so it's a 4-step process. The first step, sometimes it's the hardest actually, it's just assessment. And there's 2 parts to that. The first part is psychological and business profiles. So this is usually done online. And I have access to like a very wide range of them because I'm also a clinical psychologist. And I've got all the licenses, for the usual, like some of your listeners might have heard of the Myers-Briggs.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you taken it yourself?
I have not. I can pretty much guess what I would be. But,
what would you be, do you think?
well, I'm introverted. I forget what the other elements are.
Introverted? Let me challenge it. Well, it's different on a podcast, isn't it? And on videos.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I was voted shyest in my class, but I got into sales and you can't be too introverted in sales. You have to be able to extend yourself and assert yourself and engage with people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like most introverts, once you get to know people, you become somewhat extroverted.
Yes, exactly. And, you're touching on something that's a misconception. So introverts often have even better social skills than extroverts. So being an introvert has nothing to do with your social skills. It has to do with how you recharge your batteries. So at the end of the day, Brian, you might want to go home and read a book, listen to a podcast, watch some TV, spend some quality time by yourself. Whereas an extrovert might want to go out and be amongst a crowd or maybe a small group of people and talk a lot and listen a lot and interact. And so very different from social skills. So in terms of sales folks and executives, it doesn't matter as long as you know yourself and you take good care of yourself. Yeah. Back to the first part of the assessment. There's some other profiles, such as there's one about conflict, which is, in any kind of business, there's always going to be conflict, whether it's between product development and sales, the delivery channels, for the products or the services, the boss, the board of directors. We've all kind of got competing needs at some point. And so there's a few profiles like that. Then the second part is I interview people that the coaching client works with. And I ask them about my coaching clients' strengths and weaknesses, areas of improvement, anything else that a coach needs to know. And that's the part that can be a little ouchy sometimes. Brian, if you can imagine, when was the last time that you got positive and constructive, direct, honest, complete feedback. So it can be a little ruthless, but it's very necessary to set the platform for the coaching goals. So, for example, if you've got problems coming to meetings on time, you think, well, nobody really notices what people do, And so that's something that's easy to work on, and that would be a coaching goal. Some other things that we work on are strategic agility, managing and measuring work, building strong teams, dealing with conflict, developing direct reports, critical thinking. So these are some of the competencies that we work on in a coaching environment.
Have you ever found somebody who wanted coaching but wouldn't take it?
It's interesting because you raised the question here of resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there always is resistance, whether it's upfront or partway through, because it can be tough to change. I mean, any of us who's ever been on a diet or wanted to drive better or quit smoking, it's tough to change human behavior. And so sometimes I've had people who wanted coaching because it can be kind of prestigious, in a talent review and succession planning plane. It can be very prestigious to be, one of the 10 or 5 chosen for executive coaching. And then I did have one client who wanted it for those reasons and wanted, of course, the next title in terms of their career progression, but really wasn't willing to do any of the homework. And since I do happen to give quite a bit of homework. This was kind of a rub. But once I pointed out, the benefits and the title, but also the self-development, they were more along for the ride. I have to do a lot of adjustment to the clients and their preferences and their lifestyle and their time.
I bet. So what do you do after the assessment?
Oh, yeah. So after the assessment, once they've recuperated from that and they're back to kind of a more measured approach and a new self-image, we set goals for the coaching assignment. And so, these are in the form of the competencies that I was talking about. So, one will be, let's say, critical thinking. And so we'll go through logic models together. Maybe one will be, dealing with difficult people. Some executives have been shielded for that, and then boom, they get a new team, and guess what? There's a difficult person there. And so we'll work on that, and I'll give them reading and, things to do. And we experiment a lot with different aspects of leadership and leadership development, and they try on different behaviors and see if they work and report back. So we set goals, and those goals are sometimes sent to the person's boss. Sometimes they'll even put their individual development plans, their little goals up, on the wall or in their cubicle or the conference room. That way, if they're working on time management, for example, or public speaking, or how I run my agendas for my meetings, everybody can see that and can help them along with the process. And, for the most part, Brian, people really do want to help their colleagues. And so they'll chip in and give feedback and help, run that meeting smoothly so everybody's out on time. Now, there is one differentiator in my individual development plans, which is the goals, is I always have them list in there obstacles. Because if Insight were alone, we'd all be, size 2 millionaires and super buff and never smoke or drink or do anything else that in excess can be harmful. But we always have obstacles. And so I work with the coaching client to identify those. So obstacles can be resistance, just like you mentioned, or it can be other obstacles like lack of time. Or if I start changing, maybe I'll outshine some of my peers. And why that might not be a conscious obstacle, I might outgrow my own boss. And if I've got a boss who's resistant to change, well, that might pose conflict for me. So these are the things that we list out ahead of time so we can manage around the obstacles.
And do you often run into, they present it as an obstacle when it's really either an excuse or a rationalization?
Do you know my client? Do you know my clients?
I've dealt with people.
You know people, huh? Yeah. Yeah, that can happen. That even happens to me, honestly. I was looking, this is a very, very silly example, but we had a leak that was coming up onto the kitchen table. And it was one of those slow leaks, Brian. It wasn't, a big flood. Yep. And I just kept on putting it off because it really wasn't that bad. Like a bowl could capture most of the water. So I put it off. And the obstacle I put is, well, I really don't have the money right now, to put 25 grand into a new roof. And, loans happen, there's plenty ways to make it work. And I just put up with this slow leak for the better part of a year. And then finally I ran out of excuses. So I got the darn thing fixed.
And how did you convince yourself? Did you kind of like put, time travel yourself to, it's probably creating mold in my attic. If I don't do it, it's going to cost me a lot of money.
No, I'm not that smart.
No, you just got sick of emptying the bowl.
Deep denial. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about the dry rot. Well, maybe occasionally I'd let myself late at night. But no, I had peer pressure.
Oh, okay. That works too now, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, what do you do after this, after you've found and put up the obstacles and put together a plan? and goals?
Oh, yes. So let's continue down the line of then the processes. Okay, so then we are doing the hard work. So we are, going into what is your thinking process? How did you get there? What is a more maybe appropriate way of thinking about your development and or your goals? So then we're talking about working on let's say they're working on executive presence. Maybe they're a little reticent or shy. So now we're practicing new body language, new stances, new ways of entering a room, new ways of engaging people, and new ways of thinking before we speak, new ways of thinking about strategic communications instead of reactions. And so, we're into operationalizing the goal. So at that point, I really am very encouraging. There's a questioning in terms of, cognitive processes. I give pertinent information. I read a lot of books. I have a lot of resources, so they come into play. I reframe the way that executives will be perceiving a business problem, for example. A lot of compassion and support. So, and there's a lot of homework that gets involved. We try different role playing. Sometimes we do camera work. So then we're into the meat of it, and that's about 3 to 4 months of that kind of work.
And is that the most effective part? Is that when they really start to see the results?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is where people will start noticing changes. Sometimes, though, that's a very astute question. Sometimes insight is enough. And sometimes even after the first, the assessment part, sometimes just reading my reports and what their colleagues have given them in terms of feedback. I always ask the question, what are 3 things that the coaching client could do right now that would help themselves and or the organization? And so sometimes just stemming from that question, people will make changes on their own. And that always tells me how motivated they are. Yeah. And of all of the success factors that go into executive coaching, motivation is by far the best predictor. Beyond IQ, EQ, title, pay, industry. If I want to change, then I'll change. And for those people, insight alone is a big cathartic moment, and that'll propel them into making some adjustments. And some of these adjustments are minor, but they have huge impact on their teams and the company.
And what is the typical why they want to change? Is it a promotion? Is it a threat of losing the job? Is it something else? Is there a consistent pattern?
There's 9. I mapped out like an employee cycle, and this isn't backed by any research except for my own experience. And I mapped out, I love lean process mapping, Six Sigma. I love visual management tools. I use them a lot with my clients. And so I mapped out like the 9 inflection points in somebody's career when they come to seek an executive coach. And I'd say there's 3 main times that they seek out. The first is to either find a new job or start a new job. And then the second is that they're high potential and they've been identified as part of a succession planning for either a specific job above them or just put in the general high potential talent pool for the next slate of jobs that come open. And then I've got, what I call the distracting behaviors executives who they're very valuable and the company appreciates their talent, but they have some behaviors that are distracting for their teams or a part of the company. And I get called in, and that's where my psychology and HR background is very helpful. And so for the first one, looking for a job and or onboarding, it's very different competencies that we need to be developing rather than I've been at the job for 3 years and I'm looking to move up. And so the biggest mistake that people will make when they start a new job, those first 90 to 120 days is so critical. It's important to make a great first impression. The biggest mistake is they continue to sell. They forget that the interview phase is over and they've got the job and now they're selling themselves. So they're starting new relationships with people and boom, they're telling everybody how great they are. They've got a ready-made plan that they're going to apply. And there's nothing more alienating than that. And, than the executives who's done this at the last 7 jobs they've had. Onboarding really is a chance to get to know the environment and the culture, the rules, whether they're spoken or unspoken, get the lay of the land. Where is the power? Who makes the decisions? What is my job? And it's very different from my job description usually. Get allies within, my peers, get to know my direct reports and my teams, because at the end of the day, that's my strength and half of my job is growing them. And so it's a very different approach to listen and learn than to come in and sell. And so yeah. Did that answer your question? I think I went off. Did I go off on a tangent?
No, that was good. I mean, I think typically people are either moving away from something or towards something. If they're kind of even keeled, I don't know if they would seek out a coach or they would just get a coach for validation versus either insight or putting together an action plan.
Yeah.
And I can't agree more that if they have a big enough why being the motivation, that's the cause, that's the catalyst to make a change.
Yes. And sometimes, maybe they got this job, but they feel it's a stretch.
Yeah.
And so, or sometimes, I've had companies who've been with me now for 20 plus years, and I know their culture very well, and I know their management teams, and they maybe made a big expense in hiring Jose Smith, and so they want to make sure he's successful, and so they'll hire me to make sure that the onboarding goes very smoothly, make sure that they've got a strategic plan that makes sense, and then that we socialize that plan and make sure that, because I'll know where the pockets of resistance are in the organization, make sure we've anticipated and worked around, any kind of change management and adoption issues. So sometimes it'll be the company that brings me in. In fact, often it is.
Yeah.
Talent review, succession planning, they know they've got good raw leadership potential there. They just, leadership, it's not a uniform adventure. We all come about it in different ways, and nobody's got time to sit in classes for a week and learn all this stuff.
Well, and people don't really learn that way, and certainly they don't change their personality, their outlook, their action plans that way.
Yes, that's right. So not only is training expensive, it doesn't really move behavior. That's true.
Yeah, it takes time, and you have to prioritize, and it's creating new habits, breaking old ones. And that is not something that you just, I found out, I shouldn't eat chocolate cake. Now I'm not going to eat chocolate cake or yell at people or, pay attention during meetings or hit my deadlines.
Yeah. I feel like you've been in my back pocket.
Well, I mean, I've been a manager and, I work with salespeople today, and I've been sales training for like 5 years, and you meet all kinds. What you like to do is meet the rep who just wants to take their game to another level. The motive is there.
Yeah.
But too often, like I get pulled into, hey, fix these guys. And then you go talk to these guys or gals, and they tell you that it has nothing to do with them. It's the product, it's the company, it's the process. And you're kind of in the middle going, I don't know what the truth is. I'm sure it's somewhere in between. Yeah. And no one's taking ownership. The finger's being pointed. And I just tell the reps, I go, if it's a stalemate, guess who's going to win?
Exactly.
Trust me, I've been in many stalemates.
Yeah.
And management always wins.
Yes.
So the onus is on you to change jobs or change attitude or change approach.
Exactly. Because Brian, what you're saying is so true, because even if it's a wrong perception, it's still that rep's problem.
It is.
Yes.
And yeah, the company has the problem too, because if the rep, too often what happens is it stays a stalemate and the rep isn't selling and the company isn't supporting and no one's happy. But at the end of the day, they're going to let the rep go. And then, but then they have to start the process all over again, which is typically a 90-day, 120-day ramp.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve the problem either. Maybe it will long
Especially
term.
when they get a new slate of reps
Yeah.
and they have the same frustrations.
Right. And all of a sudden they start hearing the same thing. I had a manager, he put 3 different people down in Atlanta. And I asked him, I go, how many is it going to take before you reevaluate what we're doing in Atlanta? It's a 5th, 6th, it might not be the rep.
And it's so costly, rather than spending the time to look at what is broken.
Yeah.
Is it the culture? Is it the process? Is it the systems we use? Is it the lack of onboarding and training? Like, what is the root cause? As I mentioned before, I love lean. And so sometimes, you're dead right, Brian. I'm brought in to coach maybe a team or a person, and then I see that there are other challenges there that can be worked on at the same time in parallel. And so I'll often be invited, or I'll make a proposal. Well, should we map out this process and see where the roadblocks are and make that very efficient so that, we've got 2 things happening at once. So it'll accelerate your time to be, ideal future state where you want, the sales or whatever to be more seamless. And so that's why I'm a coach and a consultant. And I really love process mapping. It's because that's the number one friction between people. For the most part, people want to get along. But if they have any confusion about the process, they just tolerate it and then they start to blame each other. And that's just not good.
Yeah, that's it. You have to have a common definition of what the real objective is.
Yes.
Otherwise, you get like the political thing that we've got going on today, where it's like it's polar opposite. There's no meeting of the minds.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
Right. And we're not moving forward.
We are not yet.
No, not solving anything and not getting along. And it's just gridlock for no one's benefit.
And the role of history, when you were talking about your reps, you reminded me of this VP of sales I was brought in to coach. It was one of those distracting behaviors. She had excellent sales record. She had a very strong team of 22 reps, I think, internationally. And she, blew her numbers out of the water, quarter out after quarter. A very likable gal, very outgoing. And so I was brought in to help her. And, what was told me is that she's cranky and she lashes out. So I go in and I do the assessment. Her profiles are that of an extrovert. She recharges with people, good cognitive skills. She likes to be included. She likes to include other people. So really very team oriented. And I just kept on thinking, what is going wrong here? She seems like she's made of great stuff. And then the 360, it was almost lethal to her. It was very biting feedback around some of her behavior. So I spent some time with her, and it turns out she's a VP of global sales. She's got, a good sized team, but she cannot expense more than $5,000. And so she was being strangled by red tape. Like, she just couldn't make a move. She didn't know what her budget was. The CEO was keeping everything so close and she had to fill out all of this online paperwork to get anything approved. So when she wanted to get her team together twice a year, it would take her 3 hours of planning. And this is part of what was making her so cranky. So I investigated about this. And what it was all down to history. So not even her, the previous VP of sales and the previous CEO, it was a fellow, and I guess he'd used company money for the wrong kind of sales. You know what I'm talking about.
I get it. Yeah.
Yes.
Never.
So they didn't talk to him directly. Instead, they put a policy in place.
Yeah.
And this was the policy that was still existing. So, back to our political structure, how much of it is this? And then how much of it is also,
The
history on the
operations,
global front? Yes, exactly.
the whole system. And that is usually a big part of it, because that's what management may not be sharing with the reps, is the frustration that they have trying to get things done internally. And I think
Yes.
that's your role as a consultant. If you can change that, then you're
Yeah.
changing the real problem.
And it's funny because as an outsider, I've got this grace period where everything I say is golden.
Yeah. Until it goes against somebody's will. Yeah.
Yes, and so yes, and the VP of sales can be saying the same thing for a very long time, or the CEO to the board. But if we pay, 40K to have a consultant with a couple of PhDs come and do it and do an in-depth analysis, but come to the same conclusion, sometimes that has a lot more weight than somebody intent. Sadly, this is true.
Yeah. Hey, this has been a great conversation, Nadine. Where can people go to follow you and learn more about your work?
Oh, you're so sweet. Come and find me on social media or come and find me on my website. It's drnadine.com. So it's DRNADINE, all one word, drnadine.com. And, you'll find all of my socials there. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all like that. And if you want to engage with me, you can either just find out how to do that on my website or just tweet out to me. That would be great. I love hearing from people. I love the conversations I have with people. I'm an extreme extrovert, as you can see.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Hey, I want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. That is where you can get a free copy of an ebook that I did. It's a real ebook. It's not a fluff book. It shows and talks about how companies make buying decisions and how you can influence that from both a marketing and a sales standpoint, how to find all the people that are in the decision path and what they need to see, know, and touch and feel before they make a product selection. If your team needs some coaching, some help, some training, some systems, some processes that do work today, because we know what doesn't work, or what doesn't work, I'll show you what does work and how to connect and get into pretty much any account. It includes deal coaching and content community, and I can customize it for your particular company. Just go to b2brevenue.com, look under training, schedule a call with me. We can talk it over, or just sign up. You can pay per month or all at once, whichever makes most sense for your budget. Also, I put out videos pretty much daily on LinkedIn and on YouTube. On LinkedIn, it's Brian G. Burns, and on YouTube, it's Brian Burns Sales. Just search for that if you like to consume some video content. And if you see me on LinkedIn, please put a comment and a share and a like on some of the videos. I really appreciate it. I've got a company page for each podcast. This one, the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast, where I put both content and humor videos out daily. And tell a friend about the podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Check out the show notes for all the partners and the connections you can make there, the coupon codes for the products to evaluate them, see if they're a right match for you. And we'll see you next time.